right. Hello, everyone. Um, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone who has tuned in so far. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining. We're going to wait just a few minutes while everyone gets sorted with logging in to Zoom. In the first minute or so, we would like to ask you to answer a question on Slido. So if I could please ask Vanessa to now share her screen. And we want to ask you, from your experience, what are challenges to transforming food systems? So we'll just take a few minutes doing that, if you can all access Slido. And as you can see on the screen, you can either follow the QR code on your phone or join at slido.com and put in the code that you can see. So I at least already see some typing. That's fantastic. It's great we can follow it live. And we can then definitely refer back to this. These may coincide with or differ from the perspectives we're going to hear from our speakers today, and we can use that to also guide some discussion after our panel. Some really interesting responses coming in. By now, I think we've all heard of this concept of food system transformation. A lot of us are working with it, on it. And in the last webinar, we unpacked the meaning and ways of modeling governance of food systems. So perhaps some of you joined that, but it's really great to already see diverse perspectives here. So certainly policy plays a role, social and cultural norms are an important part. Absolutely. These are all very interesting. Making transformation attractive. I like that. All right, to not take too much time, I will let you all continue answering, and we can refer back to this after the panel. I think we can get going. So my name is Hannah Ewell. I'm a visiting researcher with the Low Emissions Food Systems Initiative, and also a PhD candidate with Wageningen University and Research. I was previously advisor in the Fund for International Agricultural Research with the GIZ and engaged on this, and now am more within the system. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second webinar of a series organized through a collaboration of the CGIAR Research Initiatives on Low Emissions Food Systems, or Mitigate Plus, and Nature Positive Solutions. So today, we really want to stimulate exchange of ideas on how systems transformation has been implemented in our work in CGIAR, what challenges may remain in the Portfolio 25 process, and what those sticky factors are that are still preventing system change, what this means for CGIAR's ambition to advance the food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis, which is part of the mission. So we really want to dig a little deeper in this. And I'm just going to go through very briefly the broad agenda. So we will hear opening remarks from Cargele Masso. He is Director of the Environmental Health and Biodiversity Impact Area, followed by 3 short presentations from our panel and a discussion Q&A. So Dr. Cargele Masso, before joining CGIAR as the platform director, he was working for the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in the Natural Resources and Management program. Our 3 panelists are made up of Manla Nkomo, Chief Growth Officer at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, IITA. He's the Deliver Work Package Lead and Chief Growth Officer for the CGIAR Excellence in Agronomy Initiative, has over 23 years of sector experience, has worked with private sector, agribusiness, and in consulting with various NGOs operating in the sector. Our second speaker is Chris Benet, Principal Scientist at the Alliance Biodiversity International and CGIAR. He is currently affiliated to the CGIAR Systems Transformation Science Group, so very fitting, and seconded to Wageningen University in the Netherlands. He has over 20 years of experience conducting interdisciplinary research focused on poverty alleviation and food security. Our third panelist is Arwen Bailey. She is Advisor and Knowledge Management Specialist at the Alliance. She holds an MSc in Systems Thinking and Practice, and so we're very happy to have her give us some information on how this informs her work, providing tools and methods for exploring complex and intractable solutions and nudging them into a better state. After the panel, we will hear closing remarks provided by Dr. Wei Zhang. She's Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. And so we are very lucky to have this very exciting and diverse group. And so to start things off, I would like to hand the mic, so to speak, to Mandla. I'm so sorry. We're going to start with Cargele. So sorry. So Cargele, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, really, Hannah, for this opportunity. If you may allow me to share my screen a bit, then I just have one slide. It won't be too much, so we're safe, and I hope you can see it. And it's what I'm going to use to illustrate my thought. First of all, I just want to share the story of Kenya. A few years ago, the president of Kenya has urged his citizens to make sure that they walk the talk. So what they are really promising, they should make it happen. And as a CGIAR, with our 2030 strategy, we promised a lot, especially with transforming food systems. Now we have to make sure that we are serious about it and make it happen and move from the commitments to actions. And it's not always straightforward. I will use this slide a bit to tell you why it's not always straightforward. But the critical thing is really to make sure that we have 5 impact areas. How do we make sure that we deliver on all the 5 and minimize the synergies across them and maximize the synergies and minimize the trade-off? It's a huge task we have at hand, and we need to be well prepared. This will take a lot of needs in terms of actions for policies, for innovations, and for capacities, and making sure that we have to deliver several dimensions: environmental sustainability, agricultural sustainability, economic returns, and social equity with respect to those. How do we deliver those? I do believe is a critical challenge. And what do we use as indicators to make sure that we are making the right progress? What assessment frameworks are we using to make sure that we are really speaking the same language? And I do believe this webinar comes into the context of what 2 of our initiatives have been doing, especially of the low emission in food systems and nature positive solutions. And the timing was really perfect with respect to this slide, but also with the workshop we just had in Nairobi with the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. These 2 are critical. How do we develop nature positive solutions which deliver our targets in terms of food security, incomes, and so on, while we are minimizing the environmental degradation and as well as minimizing the climate change by minimizing emissions? So this is critical. And the reason I'm using this cascade of nitrogen is this. We produce nitrogen with really the good intention of improving food productivity and so on. And if we do a good recycling of the nitrogen, we do a good management, we are safe. We can improve on nutrition, we can improve also in livelihoods. But unfortunately, everything you see in orange are the different loss pathways. How do we make sure that we are able to manage those? And I can tell you from my own experience, it has been a challenge for the nitrogen community, which means it's also an issue I'm using nitrogen as an example, but it could apply to several of those. Really, how do we develop farming systems and food systems that allows us to make sure that we are able to improve on the productivity and minimize the environmental and climate negatives risks. These are critical things we want to work on. And how do we make it happen? I can tell you, you have a lot of work at hand. So I will not take too much time of your, really, it was just to put that we really have to be serious with the food system transformation and the synergies across our impact areas. We're keeping in mind, I will repeat myself, the environmental sustainability, agricultural productivity, economic returns, and social equity will be very, very critical. So I just want to wish you really interesting, productive discussions. The two initiatives, as I said, are really meant in terms of doing a good job. The nature positive solutions really, how do we improve productivity and minimize environmental risk? Low emission agriculture is really to make sure that all nutrients and the carbon are managed in such a way that they contribute to soil health, they contribute to productivity with minimum losses to the environment. How this is going to happen, let me listen to all of you. I just want to wish you productive discussions, keep the good work you have been doing, and make food system transformation be a reality. And back to you, Hannah, and the others.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cargele, for these opening remarks that I think very much stress the importance of taking food system transformation seriously, particularly making sure to cut across the synergies, but also minimizing trade-offs. So these were very important points identified. I would now like to hand over to Mandla to open the panel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, and of course, thanks to my brother Cargele for really laying a very solid foundation. I had the opportunity to look at the recording of the previous webinar that this team put together, and it was very clear from that webinar that a case was made that food systems, by their very nature, are very complex because of the different interactions that take place across, different pillars within those pillars, and often that there's often conflicting interests. And I think, as Cargele has just shared right now, a good intention of trying to increase nitrogen availability for crop production could actually have other impacts, negative impacts on the food system as a whole. Having said that, I think we have an opportunity to probably start to take a serious look at saying, okay, yes, it's complex, but are we very clear about its current state as the food system? And are we very clear about what our end state should look like? And who are we reorganizing or pushing for transformation of the food system for? Because I think if we're very clear about, who we're starting off with, what we want to see at the end, who we want to benefit, I think that's going to help us to make much more clearer choices than what is happening right now. Because we absolutely need to identify, in my view, those critical parts that will allow us to get to where we need to be. I would like to put in front of you that I don't believe that the global food system is the same. I think if you are in a country like Kenya, even within Kenya, you can actually find very different complexities as you move from a national level to a subnational level and down to a village level. And for that reason, it's important that we avoid, using cookie cutter approaches in terms of providing recommendations for how this transformation must take place. I think I would like to also share something which I found very useful that the BMGF, for example, has started to do, which is to put some money towards what they call the nutrient roadmaps, a little bit like what Cargele just shared with us right now, where we are tracing the movement of these nutrients right from the beginning, from their source point, how they are transformed into food or food products, and how they eventually get into the food environment. Now, having that good understanding helps us to make sure that each subsequent step is not causing harm to the previous step or to the step that follows after it. And for example, if we're looking at what Cargele just shared, it's important that when we are looking at nutrient roadmaps, yes, let's make sure that there's good availability of fertilizers and other nutrients, but this should not be done at the detriment of healthy soils, because if we don't have healthy soils, it doesn't matter how good or fortified our seeds are, and these seeds that we're making available to farmers, they're not going to be able to deliver to their full potential in terms of optimal production. And some of these things that we do, maybe with our use of fertilizers and others, could have an impact on how farmers are able to manage pests and disease. So it's very important that we understand this interrelationship between the different parts of the food system, but more importantly, the nuances that are very location specific. I would like to also maybe just share that in my current role as Chief Growth Officer for the Excellence in Agronomy Initiative, a lot of our focus has been on trying to understand and unpack the challenges associated with the production side of the food system, where farmers interact with their environment, use their management practices, and of course, use particular genetics and so forth. What we've learned is that even though, we know what needs to be done, we have not taken into account the importance of the human factor. And as a result, even though we are a science-based initiative that's focusing on agronomy science, we've had to incorporate human-centered design and other behavioral science elements into our thinking, because it's not a technical problem that only requires a technical solution. It's multifaceted. Even though we can get it right in coming up with good advisories for farmers, we need to start thinking about what are the things that stand in the way of those farmers' ability to take on board the advisories, use them, and make sure that they benefit as well. And I think if we're going to succeed on the production side of the food system, we really need to address what I think is the precipitous decline that we are seeing, particularly in Africa, towards low productivity, unsustainable production systems, which are moving us away from, I think, a nutrition or a food secure future. We need to start looking at how do we bring about sustainable intensification, a food system transformation that, yes, intensifies production, so it improves efficiencies and so forth, but does so in a manner that doesn't harm the very production system, the environmental elements, the ecosystem that makes it possible for us to deliver a fully transformed system. What Hannah didn't say is that I'm transitioning from the CG into a new role where I'll be the CEO of Partners in Food Solutions. And in that role, my focus is going to shift from the primary production, but to now look at how do we ensure that African food processing companies are making the right choices about what they will process, what raw materials they'll buy from farmers, how they'll support those farmers to grow sustainably, and how they're delivering healthy, nutritious food to the consumers that are asking for it. I believe that it's going to be important for us to really take a holistic view, to understand the complexity, be human-centered, and make sure that we are clear about where the inflection points, where we can deliver the most amount of transformation, particularly at a local level, and cascading it to a national and eventually global level. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Mandla. And I think it's very exciting that you'll be taking so many lessons to your new role. So that's very exciting. And you highlighted very critical point of avoiding cookie cutter solutions and really taking holistic approach and making sure that the solutions that we provide are very context specific and also human centered. So thank you very much for that. Next, we will hear from Chris Benet. If you would please share your screen. Thank you.
Yes, I'm hoping that you guys can see my screen now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so thanks Anna for that introduction. So yes, the topic of today's webinar is what are the sticky factors that prevent food system transformation? Well, first I'd like to add that perhaps a more appropriate question should be, what are the sticky factors that prevent food system transformation toward sustainable outcomes? Since, as we know, food systems are transforming. In fact, they never stop transforming. The problem is that they are not transforming toward sustainability. Now, also in the remaining 7 minutes of that presentation, I will argue that one of the major, if not the major factors that prevent food systems from achieving that sustainability is not a lack of technological innovation. It's politics, power, and money. Let me start with some conceptual considerations. So in the literature, you can find a lot of framework which aim at answering the question of what is a necessary condition to trigger a transformation in a socio-technological system such as food system. So I'm showing here 3 of those frameworks. One is the very early framework by Donella Meadow on the left side of the slide, on the leverage point argument that she made at that time. And the 2 others are more recent framework, one by David Abson and his colleagues, and one by John Canyon and colleagues. I'm obviously not going to go in the detail of those frameworks, but what is interesting to notice is that all those 3 frameworks, and many others in fact, stress the same conclusion. For a system transformation to happen, you cannot just tweak the parameter of the system through some bundles of policies, self-regulated or mandatory standard taxes or subsidies in an attempt to nudge the actors' behavior and investment. You need to go much deeper, looking at changes, not just the power allocation, but the actual goal of the system, the underlying values, the paradigm, and the mental models that underpin the system. Only in that condition can you hope to see transformative changes to happen. Now, what the empirical evidence tells us is that the world is still not ready for such a change. So let's take the example of the red meat to illustrate what is really happening. So we all know what it will take to stay within the planetary boundary. It will require a greater than 50% reduction in the production and consumption of red meat at the global level. And note here, I'm not entering into the false debate about who should do what, okay? Now, everyone, government, private sector, civil society, all swearing that they are working hard on it. Yet, what do we see? First, consumption. Consumption is currently exceeding by the reference diet intake by between 300 and 600%. Even more concerning, 3 billion people, so half of the population in the world, are expected to increase their consumption of meat in the coming decades. As for the production, that one is projected to expand by another more than 19 million tons per year, reaching nearly 345 million by 2030. And what do the government do exactly? Well, in the 3 countries that are the largest producers of red meat, the US, China, and Brazil, we see that in the case of the US, for instance, Tyson and Smithfield, which are 2 of the largest actors of the sector, have in the past received an aggregate more than $570 million of subsidy per year. In China, the pork industry has been receiving about $20 billion per year, which represents more or less 47% per pig. And in Brazil, the federal government itself is a shareholder of GBS, who is the world's largest meat processor. On how on earth can this be happening? Well, it happened because there are some very powerful actors who have strong economic and financial interests to ensure that the current trend does not change. That applies not just to the red meat industry, of course, as we just discussed, but to the whole food system. Did you know, for instance, that the combined spending of all agribusiness lobbying in Washington exceeds the lobbying expenditure of the entire US defense industry? Or that between 2013 and 2015, food corporations in the US spent more than 192 million to try to block or to stop different legislation that were aimed at improving information about food content. And the final straw on the food system camel is in fact brought by us. As part of the international expert community, when we naively or ideologically join the industry to claim that technological innovation is the solution, when we all know that the food system as we observe it today, with all its unsustainable outcomes, is in fact the result of technological innovation like the ones we see on the slide. In that regard, it's very interesting or very revealing to see which company the World Economic Forum, the same World Economic Forum that had hijacked the UNFSS event on the same year in 2021, which company it considers as the most innovative company in the world. Oh, and by the way, the one highlighted in red are the ones that are directly involved in food systems: Walmart, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Bayer. Needless to say that this demonstrates exactly my earlier comment. We are not ready to challenge the underlying mental model of the food system. At least not everyone is. Until that model is challenged and replaced, we will continue to see the food system inundated by unhealthy, unsustainable products. We will continue to see obesity, overweight, and cities affecting billions of people, while a small group of actors will continue to become richer and richer. And we'll continue to have this type of webinar where we wonder why the heck is the system not changing? Okay, so to conclude, I'm sure you will agree that all of this is, of course, presented in a rather provocative manner, but I hope you appreciate that this is only to ensure that we'll have a lively discussion. So happy to answer your question and comment during that discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I think it's very important to also really keep this big industry in mind that stands behind so much of the stickiness behind not seeing food systems change. And so now we will hear from Arwin Bailey next regarding looking internally to the CGIAR in terms of what factors are preventing systems change. So Arwin, please go ahead.
Okay, unmuted. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. So as you said, I'm going to look at us internally at CGIAR and reflect on why we find it so tricky to embrace systems approaches in our work. And to do this, I'd like us to reflect on these three questions. So, are we talking the same language as each other when we talk about systems? Are we trapped in analysis paralysis? And are we trying to tame wicked problems too early? So the first question, are we talking the same language as each other? Let me just invite everybody who's online to think, what does it mean to you to take a systems approach? You know, you can put it in the chat if you feel bold, or write it on a bit of paper. So maybe for you, it means reaching out beyond your normal discipline to unusual partners or unusual disciplines that you don't normally work with, or working with different stakeholders in different sectors. Or maybe it means identifying feedback loops and leverage points, or as Chris was saying, bringing in different mental models and engaging the heart and head and hands. And maybe you recognize your definition of systems approach as one of these approaches, which are on the screen now. But why does it even matter if we're all thinking about systems approaches in different ways? Well, I think it matters because, firstly, if we don't intentionally engage with the kind of rich traditions of systems thinking, we may be missing out on decades of methodologies and approaches that can actually help us. And each approach has a long tradition of methodologies and tools it favours. And also each one's useful in different situations, so we can like pick and choose which ones we want to use. And second, people from different systems approaches may not be talking the same language as each other. So if we look at the top and the bottom of these approaches, the top are the more ontological approaches and the bottom are more epistemological approaches. So in the first case, we see systems as out there, and we can analyze them and engineer them. So we say, this is a food system. What are the components of that? And in the second case, we see a mess or a wicked problem, and we organize an explorations of the conditions that are holding this situation in place. Like Chris was saying, you know, these situations are dynamic, they're constantly changing. The outcomes are the same and getting worse. So what are the conditions that are holding that poor situation and getting worse situation in place? So in the first case, we're treating the system as though it actually exists as a thing that we can describe and analyze and engineer. And in the second case, we're looking at a messy situation and working out what's the interacting elements that we can call a system of interest that we want to improve. So the kind of two fundamentally complementary approaches. But if you're embedded in one tradition or the other tradition, you need to be intentional to see outside of your regular methodologies and thinking patterns. And, oh, slide's not working. Okay. One problem when we use a purely ontological approach is that of analysis paralysis. So what would you think of if I asked you to think of a food system? You might think of this one, which a lot of people use. You might think of something like this, or indeed in the webinar a few months ago, there were some other depictions of food systems, and they're all perfectly good, but they all depict different interacting elements, and each one omits some bits. So maybe we should just combine them all and make one really, really comprehensive one that covers everything. But of course we can't do that because, as they say, the map is not the territory. So you can just drive yourself mad by adding more and more analysis as you go deeper and deeper. And not only deeper, also wider. I mean, where do we draw the boundaries in the system? I thought I'd share this article as a wonderful example of the trickiness of boundary judgments in systems thinking and analysis. So thinking back to Cargele's super introduction, whoever would have expected the results in this paper from 2017, the authors found that an unbalanced use of nitrogen was leading to a decrease in small fish near the shores of Lake Victoria, leading to women resorting to sex for fish and driving an increase of HIV and AIDS. So does that fit in your food systems model, or is that your fish biodiversity model, or your natural resources, or your health model? So in a way, this is a really good example of a wicked problem. So here's some parts of a definition of a wicked problem. So first of all, there's little consensus on what the problem is, much less the solution. So in the fish case, depending on your perspective, it's a nitrogen problem, it's a women's health problem, it's an HIV problem, it's a fish problem, and more. And because also, since the problem definitions are unlimited, the solutions are unlimited, and they'll involve different benefits and drawbacks for different people, which refers back to what Chris was saying about those powerful vested interests who have every interest to keep things as they are. So the problem, if you try and tame it early, is that you're turning a wicked problem into a simple problem about fish or about women or about nitrogen or whatever. And then it becomes a linear problem. It's no longer really systemic, and it causes problems elsewhere in place and time. So your solution becomes a trigger for a new wicked problem. So how can we approach these situations? And this is where I think the epistemological approaches are really useful, so that rather than deciding beforehand that we're looking at a food system or an AIDS prevention system or a fish biodiversity system or whatever it is, we see this messy situation and explore what's holding it in place. So this means bringing in lots of perspectives. So rather like what's happening in the multi-stakeholder platforms and the learning lab approaches, which are used in the Mitigate Plus and Nature Plus initiatives. These can give us like joint identification of the elements of the wicked problem and potential solutions and what they mean for different people. And then using also some of the frameworks like Chris was showing us that show the contributions of mental models and relationships and power and what we need to do to create new narratives. And also embracing uncertainty, because there isn't one right answer. As Mandla was saying, it's not a technical problem with a technical solution. It's a human problem with many, many multiple solutions. So there isn't one definitive solution, because these are dynamic situations, not physical systems. It's not like replacing the tires on your car. So there's more of a solution space where new knowledge can lead to improved practices, and new practices can lead to changes in understanding. And these can slowly transform a situation through concerted action into an improved situation, and then again to a new improved situation. So I will stop there so we have time for questions, and thank you for the opportunity to share these reflections with you.
Thank you, Arwen. You've given us a lot to think about, I think, and really packaged it in a way that we hope that everyone has now really thought about the way we do things and the way we could approach solution thinking together. So thank you to the entire panel. I think we've had very interesting discussions. I can already see 2 questions, but please keep them coming, and also feel free to come in directly. But I'll start with the first question that was posted in the chat to Mandla. In your new position, will whole grain cereal-based foods be promoted to improve nutrient density and dietary quality too? This is something consumers are not really asking for, but it would produce significant improvement in the prevalence of some non-communicable diseases related to diet. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and I think it kind of agrees with what the point Chris was making, and also the point that Arwen made, that you know, we need to understand that the food people consume is really driven by probably 3 things. Number one is what gets promoted. Secondly, what is readily available. And thirdly, what is affordable. I come from the southern part of the continent, and I can tell you that in South Africa, we lead the race in terms of obesity and other associated conditions. And yet you've got a country that has got over 16 million people, almost a third of its population that are food insecure. And the reason for that is what gets promoted is not necessarily the healthy diet. It's the alternative diet. And even if people wanted to eat healthy, the foods that are healthy are never available in the shops that you know, the poor people have got access to. And when they do have access, or if they want to get a healthy diet, they can't afford it. So I fully agree that this issue is complex. It's not just a case of giving people a dietary chart and saying, these are the 5 foods that you need to eat every day. It's much more complex than that. So in my new role, I think what we want to try and do is to really utilize the processing space as a great opportunity for influencing what farmers grow, but also what consumers eventually get. How can we create a new type of food processor that understands consumer needs, but also understands the complexities associated with unhealthy diet and unsustainable production systems, and starts to influence how farmers produce? I'll give you an example. Within Excellence in Agronomy, we've been working a lot in the cassava space. And our work on cassava focused a lot on the agronomy, how to grow cassava well, how to grow biofortified cassava, how to make sure that the yields are good, that farmers can make money. But guess who are our biggest scaling partners? The biggest scaling partners are the aggregators, it's the processors, it's the input suppliers. So in a sense, these guys have influence on whether farmers grow a particular type of variety or not. If they are not demanding for biofortified cassava, then the farmers will not grow it. That's number one. And the consumers will definitely not get it. So I think it's important that we look at those inflection points, or the points of influence that would have an outsized influence, not only on the preceding step in the supply chain or in the value chain, but also the subsequent steps. And then in that way, influence the entire system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Manlo. That's a very important reflection on these important leverage or inflection points that can really trigger change. And that connects also to Chris's presentation with the different theories also pointing to that. And that actually links to one of the questions by Elizabeth Bryan on the cultural social drivers of unsustainable diets. Chris, this was saying that the industry has an influence, of course, keeping prices of meat low through subsidies, et cetera. But what are those underlying drivers of unsustainable diets that, how do we address those challenges?
Yeah, I think it should be clear that it's not just the transnational corporations that are, the bad guys. And here I make the distinction between those transnational corporations and private sectors, because as, Manla reminds us, the private sector is also those small and micro enterprises that are usually put in the same box that those transnational corporations. And I think it's very important to make the distinction. But if you do remember what I said, I didn't simply say that those transnational corporations have a huge responsibility. I also mentioned the government and also the consumers. I remind people that 3 billion people are choosing to increase their actually consumption of red meat. And I say choosing, they are not forced to, okay? And the fourth, guilty in the picture is actually us. By endorsing or by supporting and by validating the current narrative that we can fix the system by, simple fix such as technological innovation or artificial intelligence, like Jeff Bezos' 100 million new coal, we are contributing to misguiding the decision makers. Why do we need to focus, however, on the transnational corporations? Because there are very few of them. It's going to be much more resource efficient to twist the arms of those transnational corporations than to try to convince 7 billion consumers that they need to change their diet. Let's push where the system is the more concentrated, because that's where, from a resource perspective, talking from the South Africa government, from the Kenya government, they don't have the choice on the resources to, influence all the consumers in the countries, but they do have few resources that they can target as the key actors that control the system. That's all what I was saying. But I recognize that consumers have their part of responsibility in the current situation. Over.
Yes, for sure. I mean, that really points to the whole system, need for systems approaches. We have a question from Janelle. You're welcome to ask it directly to the panel.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you to the presenters. Very interesting and needed discussion. So my question relates to quite similar to the last question for Chris Benane regarding these companies. They clearly have a lot of power, and especially in low and middle income countries, they play a very large role in shaping food systems. But as well, they contribute not only to negative side effects, but also play a role in economic development and infrastructure development and so on. And in countries who are trying to prioritize economic development, what do you say to governments to convince them to change these subsidies, to change how they're selecting investments? How do you address the trade-offs for making green investment decisions versus these other investments that have these more negative outcomes of the food system? Thank you.
So I suppose the question was directed at me, but I think Arven or Mandla could also jump in. If I had the answer, I would probably be Nobel Prize right now. So I don't. But I know a few things. Is again and again, if we recognize that that's the beauty of the food system thinking, is recognition that there's trade-off and compromises. I usually say to students, the very first steps in addressing a problem is actually acknowledging that there's a problem, on understanding the problem. And I still think that a lot of people, again, don't get me wrong, but naively put forward the synergy and the complementarity, as opposed to actually recognize that synergy are easy to manage. What is much more challenging to navigate is trade-off. So we should actually put more of our attention to those issues of trade-off and prioritizing and helping decision makers to make priorities, as opposed to pat them in the back and pretend that everything's going to be okay by finding few synergies. There's much more trade-off in the system than there are synergy. So again, as a researcher, and I'm not sure if Janet is one of them, but in the community of the researchers, this is our responsibility to also shift a bit of our own discourse to be a bit more honest about the challenge that we have in front of us, and again, not simply going always for the easy, low-hanging fruit, and acknowledge that there's some very deep question that we need to address. Over to you. I'm sorry, Janet, if I have not responded concretely. Maybe Arven and Mandla want to say something.
Can I chime in, Hannah?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think what I wanted to say, I think that's a very good question. I think let's also not, come off as if we're saying that there are things that there are very few options that people have, whether they are governments or consumers and so forth. There's a lot of options. And I think if we start with governments themselves, for example, if you look at the mandatory fortification of cereals like maize meal, of flour in some countries and so forth, that's something only government can do. They can mandate that certain fortifications, especially of vitamins and so forth, are basically included into the main ingredients that people use for their staples. That's something that governments can do. But what we can do as researchers is to make sure that the right kind of varieties, okay, that make it easy for some of these nutrients to find their way into common staples are available. I had a story in Zambia which was really fascinating. A team, I think from ICRISAT, came up with a fantastic sorghum variety which was packed with nutrients, and this thing was a winner. It had good yields. It was deployed. 10 years later, when the researcher came to look at what was going on, no one grew it. And you know why? Because it was taking too long to cook and the consumers rejected it. So it was a technically good solution, but we missed out on the human-centeredness and we lost an opportunity. So next time you try and convince people to adopt a new variety which is packed with nutrients and so forth, they're still remembering the last one that required so much energy to cook that it was unviable. You know, so I think it's these multiple complexities that we need to bring into the mix and really give policymakers, processors, and consumers real choices that they can act upon. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, Arwin, go ahead, because I was going to ask you to reflect on one more question. Maybe you could combine your response then with what you were about to say. But there is a question also kind of self-reflective in the sense of saying, and this connects with what Chris was saying too, is aren't we all part of this? Kind of what are the perverse incentives on the structures that CGIAR is operating within? And maybe you could also reflect on kind of who's missing at the transformation table, or what's kind of what would be something you would suggest for how we might change internal? That's a big ask, but but your reflection on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. I just want to go back to what Mandla and Chris were saying, and also a little bit Elizabeth's question as well. And this also goes back to what Mandla was saying at the beginning. We need to know where we are and where we want to go. And also the actual farmers that we're working with, they know where they want to go. So we should be in the business of increasing their options, because maybe when we're developing a technology or a solution, we really only have 1 or 2 or 3 objectives in mind. Maybe we're thinking about we need to increase the population's nutrition, improving the population's nutrition, and we're thinking about, and we need to reduce nitrogen, the eutrophication of soils and so on. So we have our objectives, but that smallholder farmer might have other objectives of their own. So we should be in the business of providing an assortment of innovations that allow them to pick and choose what they want for their own agency and their needs, because they know where they want to go. And we need to get that sort of complex web of everybody's different intentions and aspirations and try and sort of push it, tweak it into the same sort of direction. So blocking that perhaps is the second part of your question about perverse incentives, which are perhaps stopping us from going in that direction. And I wonder whether some of the system's tools might be useful for that. So there is a tool that we use quite a lot called critical systems heuristics, which allows you to look at the sources of power of different stakeholders. So there's the power of who's paying, and that's recognized. There's the power of expertise, and perhaps that's where we come in with some technical solutions. But there's also, for example, the power of those people who are going to be affected by whatever we're proposing, and they're not even involved in its development or rolling it out. So that sort of makes a case for more concerted action and more sort of collective action. And going back to what I was saying in my little presentation, also more of those forums where we bring more voices in, so that we've got sort of more legitimacy and accountability for things that we want to do. The other thing we can do is actually look at where the each context obstacles are, right? Is this a knowledge gap? If we're talking about eating more nutrition-rich foods, is it because people don't know it's nutritious, they can't afford it, it's got a poor people's sort of perception and it's not cool, you know? And we need to go by context and what is the obstacle that's not taking us in the direction we want to go. I could talk for hours, but that's enough.
Those are really, really important points, and I think we could all discuss on these issues much longer. But unfortunately, we will need to go into closing. But we're very lucky to have Wei Zhang provide some reflections and closing remarks. So if I could please ask you, Wei, to come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all the speakers and Hannah. So yeah, the case has been made, and the challenges to the food system transformation have been relatively well studied, and But despite these challenges, we also know that no action is not a choice. Fortunately, years of our research, partners' work, and experience have pointed to some strategies, right, that can facilitate this transformation along with concerted effort. So just to highlight a few, we know that governments play a crucial role in shaping the transformation and through legislation, regulation, incentives, and we need policy reforms to improve the policy coherence, reduce the perverse incentives, and integrate policy across areas. We need a better partnership and collaboration among diverse stakeholders, and also increasing public awareness about the multifaceted impacts of food choices, encourage consumers and all other key actors in the food sectors to make more sustainable choices. So just to echo all the excellent points by the speakers and audience, I want to share a few thoughts on what the implications are for CG as we work to build our mega programs. So one is that, I think we're all pretty convinced that we need system thinking and system approach, and system thinking needs to be integrated into the development of CG programs at the CG level, into staff professional development and incentives at the institutional level, and also into the implementation of project at research at the project level. And very crucial to that is, the CG research role to help change mental models, crafting and co-developing a narrative about alternative vision of the future, identifying different ways of knowing, doing, and being, and our research can contribute to understanding, unpacking the complexity of food system, anticipating and managing trade-offs, illuminating the scenarios of alternative potential solutions. Our expertise on gender, social inclusion, political economy, participator action can help us understand the bureaucratic inertia, institutional barrier, and improving governance. And key to all this is system literacy, right? We need to make sure we have a basic understanding across the CG what means to use system thinking and system approach and how to apply them in practice. We need to take advantages of all the great work presented by some of the our speakers done on system approach to develop our methodologies and approaches that could help us move things forward better. The 5 impact areas of CG, they're interconnected and co-evolving. They're mutually involved, enforcing. So progress on one impact area will inevitably affect and also depends on the progress on other impact areas. They also tend to respond to the same set of system level levers such as governance, institutions, and R&D. So it is essential for CG projects and programs to take these 5 impact areas seriously, mainstreaming them into our projects and actively seeking synergies and minimizing trade-offs, at the minimum causing no harm. We are changing agent ourselves, and we play an essential role in transforming food system in terms of advancing science and co-creating solutions, knowledge, testing and evaluating options, solutions, and informing decision-making. But we also need to be empowered and equipped with the tools and also transdisciplinary approach capacity that are needed to work side by side with our partners. Finally, I just want to invite you to stay tuned and join us in this journey to reflect on how to contribute to food system transformation. Our next webinar of this series will focus on food system transformation in action. which will showcase examples of approaches and solutions from folks at the front line of working on operationalizing transformation and at the intersection of science and policy. So with that, I hand it back to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wei. Thank you again to all of our speakers, Manla, Chris, and Arwin, and Cargele for your great opening remarks. As Wei just said, stay tuned for the next webinar. Please join us in thinking about those actionable approaches. So we've learned a lot from the speakers today and have a lot to think about. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you.